Good evening. Welcome to Divine Speech in African Traditionalism. I am your host, Augustine Ayinibisah Ayelah. Before I do anything, I want to tell you that I have to rise before my father and my mother, the two individuals who taught me right and wrong, not to lie and not to steal, before I knew there was something called a school. I rise before my grandfather and my grandmother, whom I call my ancestors. I rise before the land deities, the water deities, the sky deities. I rise before the goddesses, especially the goddess Ma'at, to give me wisdom to make this presentation without offending another human being. I rise before the gods, especially the god Ampu, the god of mummification, whose subject I'm about to embark on. Finally, I rise before the Supreme Being, Amen-Re, to give me strength to do justice to this topic, funerary leaders. With this prayer, I know I am permitted to speak. As for him who knows this book, nothing evil shall have power over him. He shall not be turned away at the gates of the west. He shall not go in. He shall go in and out, and bread and beer and all good things shall be given to him in the presence of those who are in the Netherland. This is spell 181 of the Book of Coming Forth from Darkness to Light, also known as the Papyrus of Ani, the royal scribe of the divine offerings. Ani is a Katsina name in northern Ghana. Today's show will focus on one of the hierarchy of African traditionalism. This presentation is based on one tradition, the Frafra Grusi tradition of Ghana and Burkina Faso, called Barakabko. It is very crucial to the survival of part of African traditionalism. The leadership I'm referring to is funerary leaders. The Grusi or Frafra people call funerary leaders Kuyon Orba. Who are funerary leaders and what are their roles in the ecclesiastical administration of Barakabko? First, funerary leaders are members of an order, or what some will call a secret society, responsible for preparing the soul of the deceased in transition for their final journey to the land of the dead, or Guruntenga. They are responsible for the performance of funerals as well as deification ceremonies. There is a distinction between funerary leaders, Kunyorba, and undertakers, Bayasi. Even though the powers of both orders are derived from one ancient Kemetic god called Ampu, later changed to Anubis by the Greeks, there is a fine line between them. In fact, the name is not Ampu, it is Ampo. Whereas, I will come to that later. Whereas the undertakers or Bayasi are responsible for preparing the mortal remains of the deceased for burial, as well as grave digging and tomb building, funerary leaders or kunyorba's main responsibility is to prepare the soul of the newly dead to transition from the land of the living or Guruntenga to the land of the dead, Guruntenga. In Bakabko, when a person passes on, he or she cannot be considered dead unless his or her funeral is performed. It is a lifelong goal of every grown child to perform a befitting funeral of his or her parents. But no individual son or daughter is capable of performing the funeral of his or her parents by themselves. That is when funeral leaders take charge. Funeral leaders, as stated earlier, derive their devotion and powers from an ancient Kemetic god called Ampo, whose name was later changed to Anubis by the Greeks. Ampo was the god of mummification, tomb building, embalming, a tomb guardian, and the defender of corpses. Ampo in Guruni means who swore. Ampo was a jackal-headed, human-looking god who embalmed the mortal remains of the first god-human king of the universe, called Asa by his ancient African Kemetic name. The name was changed to Osiris by the Greeks. The change of name came about after the conquest of Kemet by the Greeks. They also changed the name of the land they conquered, Kemet, to Egypt. Ampo is responsible for performing funeral rites and protected the newly dead before the weighing of the heart, known as Judgment Day, in the Hall of Asa. In the Frafra Grusi tradition, the family of the deceased would have to appeal to Nyara Doma, or chaste people, or religious decision makers of their plan to perform the funeral of their loved one. They also have to report to the king of the village as well as the land priest. Informing all the important people is done after consultations with the prophetic deity or Bakoloko for clearance. The preparations for a funeral by the family include the following: malt making, oil processing, grinding of flour, soaking and cleaning of black-eyed peas, purchasing of animals, consulting entertainers, soaking and cleaning of bambra beans, cracking and soaking of tamarind seeds. After the decision makers give the green light for the funeral to be performed, a day is picked for the wake. Announcements have to be made across the village. Special delegations are sent to inform female family members married outside the villages. One day of the week, or on the day of the week, the decision makers will meet in the house of the mourning and select the person who will be in charge, or the chief mourner. The chief mourner, or Kurdana, will also select his assistants and the lady of the yard. The chief mourner and his assistants will arrive at about 1 p.m. in the afternoon and be seated in front of the house. The lady of the yard and her assistants arrive at the same time and are seated in the yard of the eldest woman of the family. Towards the evening, people from all directions of the village begin to converge on the house. Drummers, violin players, guitar players, lead singers of female hand-clapping teams arrive as well with their musical instruments. Until the wake is officially declared, no musical instruments can be sounded. Close to midnight, the chief mourner will declare the wake commenced with the morning cry and lamentations by female members in the main yard. Celibacy is declared. Once the funeral rites are ongoing, sexual intercourse is forbidden between men in the front of the house and women in the yard, even when they leave the funeral home to their respective homes. In African traditionalism, the birth of a child is the beginning of that child's journey. The journey includes many obstacles, failures, and success stories. The death of a person means the end of the journey. During the funeral, closure has to be brought to bear on this journey. The first activity after the wake all night to the early morning is the rite of the shortening of the journey, or closer to the life of the deceased and his or her onward new journey to the afterlife. How is this done? To live, a person needs oxygen, water, and food. There could be abundance of water and food in a person's possession, but without oxygen, they still cannot live. In the shortening of the journey rite, which we call manare, literally translated the cutting of the leg, an animal, a cow, a goat, a sheep, chicken, or guinea fowl is used for the ceremony. But the process is completely different from a sacrifice. Whereas a sacrifice means the spilling of blood, the process of manare forbids the spilling of blood as the cause of death. In this process, instead of cutting the throat of the animal has to be snuffed off oxygen until it suffocates. It is forbidden to allow the animal from making noise, and is also not allowed to pass gas or defecate. After this process, the person is now declared newly dead, and the process of deification is underway. This also prepares the newly dead to learn how to eat the food of the land of the dead, or Guruntenga. During the funeral, funerary leaders are responsible for indoctrinating the newly dead about to be deified how to taste the various dishes prepared for it, as well as the drinking of blood, water, beer in the afterlife.